So just a little bit of background here. Tom DiNapoli was born and raised and still lives on Long Island, where I was in Nassau County too, which is where I was raised as well. Did you know that? Oh yeah. Valley Stream. You were Hempstead. No. North Hempstead. Yep. Neighbors. We were neighbors. He was elected to the New York State Assembly in 1986, and that's where I met him because he was chairing the Environmental Conservation Committee, and I was at that time working for, again, a member organization that had environmental issues. So we go back longer than I think I even want to remember, quite frankly. He was first elected state controller in 2007, has been elected every time since then. And as you know, because he sends out notices, and we always talk about it, under his leadership, the New York State pension system has become one of the best managed pension systems in the country. And I know he'll talk a little bit about that, so I'm not going to steal any of that thunder. So he did an interview with a New York City reporter recently, and here's some of the things he talked about that I found out about you. He said he was inspired to go into public service by Martin Luther King. And he felt that public service was his calling because it's a way to make a positive difference with people. Now, the reporter asked him what his dream job would be. And he said he wanted to be a writer. He would write a play or write a novel, right? And he probably has lots of stories to tell about all the people that he's helped and met along the way. So we're very fortunate to have Tom overseeing the pension fund especially because some of our members who retired many, many years ago, whose pensions are small, whose Social Security is small, and they rely on pension and Social Security for their income. And Tom keeps the pension fund safe that we all can be assured of our pension income. So let's give him a nice warm welcome. You can use the code in there.
Thank you, Diana. Good afternoon, everyone. What a great turnout. It's great to be at Diana. I just said you made me very nervous because I never know what I say to some of the reporters. So I wasn't sure what she was going to say. I was also nervous because a few years ago, I think it was after an annual meeting, I sent in my membership for RPEA, even though, because remember I said I look forward to when I could be a member. So Ed said, you don't have to be retired to be a member. But I have a feeling my membership may be due. So check the records and see if dues are in order. So Ed Brown will probably check that out as treasurer, right? So Diana, thank you for the nice introduction, for the invitation to be here, and for our long association. We spent some good years together in the legislature as well, and really appreciate your important role as president of this very important organization. I also want to thank, obviously, the entire team at RPEA, the staff, Mary Fry, the executive vice president, Ed Brown, your treasurer, Bill Barrett, assistant treasurer, Patricia Walsh, secretary. Alan Dorn has stepped up to be interim executive director, so how about a collective round of applause for those who make the work done each and every day. And of course, my commendations to all of the RPEA members, because you are the ones who bring strength to this association from every part of our state, and you are the ones whose unity and voice really does secure retirement benefits, health benefits, up to date on issues. Your advocacy is very, very key. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I'm very proud to say we have some graduates from the Comptroller's office. Mentioned Bill Barrett, we'll mention him again because he was one of the people that made sure the pension fund was invested wisely many years ago, so he gets some credit for the fact that we're in good shape. Of course, Kevin Murray, who greeted me and said, don't remind people it was just my birthday. So I'm not going to mention that because I'm sure you already took care of that. But I will mention that when I first became a controller, Kevin headed the benefit side of the retirement system, really did such an extraordinary job. Obviously, he's been a very key part of the RPEA family for a long time, and it's always great to be in his company. And I know your board member, who's my former colleague from the Assembly, Roanne DiStito. I think it's an asset to have someone who was such a fierce fighter for public employees in the legislature to be part of your leadership team. And she promised me she was going to show up today, and here she is. There's Roanne DiStito. And I also be remiss if I didn't mention your representation of your colleagues in terms of our work each and every day. Diana, in addition to her leadership of RPEA, serves on our advisory council for the retirement system, and we appreciate her input there. Ed Brown serves on our actuarial advisory committee, so he knows all the numbers and everything. So if you have tough questions about how we come up with the employer contribution rates, ask Ed, don't ask me. And Paul Moore is a very active member of our audit committee. So RPA is well represented. So give a round of applause to all those folks who give us help and assistance each and every day. So I know you've had a long morning, but I want to give you an update on a couple of things. Obviously, I'll be talking about the pension fund, but let me give you a quick update as well as far as how our state is doing, because you're all New Yorkers, you're all taxpayers, you care about what's happening in the larger community. And I would say the news overall is good. You know, certainly from where we were a couple of years ago, impact of COVID is by and large in the rearview mirror, not completely, still got to be careful. There's been a spike again, as you know, in recent weeks, so be mindful of that. I got my vaccination 2 weeks ago. I'm not telling you what to do, but be careful out there. From an economic point of view, certainly what we look at in the Comptroller's office, we certainly see good news. We've been in a recovery mode with the state's economy for the last couple of years. Why do we track the economy? Well, the economy then drives the tax base that funds all the important programs for the state of New York. So when you look at the 2 million or so jobs we lost during the depths of the COVID close down, we've now grown back all the jobs that were lost on a statewide basis. And that's very, very good news. The challenge is when you drill down on the numbers, because we're a big state, every region's a bit different. Not every region is back 100%. Some regions are back a little over 100%. New York City, which for a long time actually lagged the rest of the state, was one of the main reasons why New York's numbers lagged the rest of the nation. New York City has come back, more than 100%. Southern tier, North Country, still facing a fair amount of challenges, certain parts of central New York. And not all sectors are back 100%. Certainly in terms of construction, government jobs as well are fewer right now when you look at state and local government positions than they were pre-pandemic. So there is variance between regions, there's variance between sectors, but we're still adding jobs, and that's good news. The unemployment rate over the summer was down to about 4.4%. So there's positive news as far as the employment picture. And my anticipation is we're going to continue to see positive economic activity. As you know, the Fed's cut the interest rates, so that's going to have an impact, in terms of mortgages and people's confidence about spending, and interest rates hopefully will start to come down on credit cards and so on. So I think this is going to be positive trends as far as the overall economy. Hopefully it'll be reflected in good news as far as tax revenue. So again, when we look at tax revenue coming to the state and to our local governments, we look at sales tax every month. And again, here's where we see continued growth. When we looked at the second quarter for this year, we had statewide increase over 2% in sales tax revenue. Not quite as robust a growth as we saw a year or two ago, again, coming out of COVID and when inflation was higher, kind of going back to pre-pandemic levels. But what we're really seeing across the state is that for those local governments, particularly counties, who then share some of that tax revenue with villages and cities and towns within the jurisdiction, and certainly for the state, where sales tax is the second biggest revenue source after personal income tax, we're seeing positive growth. Personal income tax as well. So when we do the budget, when the legislature, the governor do the budget, we then monitor what's happening. And again, people sometimes say, well, I hear about all these taxpayers that are, moving out of the state, and we're losing people. And it is true, our population is going down. There is a net loss as far as taxpayer migration, we call it. We continue to chart that. We are losing some folks at the upper end that pay a higher share of the income taxes. Actually, we have a bigger number of folks leaving at the lower end of the income scale because of the affordability question in the state. But the reality is not everybody's leaving. And when we look at our projections, particularly for personal income tax, because that's the biggest tax revenue for the state, we continue to have revenue coming in higher than projected. So the state budget that was put together this year, the highest in the state's history, is holding together because actually the revenues are exceeding projections. But I believe we need to be mindful of the fact, though, that that is an issue of having a net loss of taxpayers, particularly at the upper end. We need to be mindful of that as we head into the next budget cycle, which will kick off actually next month in November. It's called a quick start to the budget process, where the revenue and spending projections are put forward by the governor and the legislature and the Comptroller's office. And the two big cost drivers in the state budget continue to be education and health care, right? The school aid formula and the Medicaid program. Both of those often are contentious issues. Roanne can remember those days when we served in the legislature. School aid, the governor made some proposals on how to change some of that formula, very contentious in this year's budget discussion. So, as is often the case, all those changes were taken off the table. Rockefeller Center is doing a study on how to reform the school aid formula. I think that will be a big focus of discussion next year. And healthcare through the Medicaid program, very expensive program. We've made a number of recommendations to our audits about ways to save money on Medicaid spending without hurting services. I have to say, by and large, our audits are not necessarily adhered to. As controller, we can do an audit, we can make recommendations. I can't force any agency to adopt them, but I certainly think the issue of the level of Medicaid spending, it's an important program. A lot of people really depend on it, but we need to be smarter about how we're spending that money. So stay tuned for discussions about those two big items in the next budget cycle. So obviously, a big issue of concern to all of you is how's our pension fund doing? And Diana was kind to point out that we are benefiting, not just during my tenure, but from controllers before me, who always kept a priority on keeping the state pension fund in a strong position. When we say we have among the best pension funds, if not the best in the country, I want you to think about a couple of things. We're big. $267 some odd billion. We're the third largest in the country. What makes us as strong as we are is not how big we are, as impressive as that may be. What makes us strong is how well funded we are. So the real issue is do we have enough money in our assets to pay for the obligation we have to our retirees? And that's where New York State has always come out on top. The numbers always change, and depending on the valuation of the fund and the level of payouts, there's always some difference from year to year. So about 2 years ago we were actually at 103% funded, right? Over 100% based on the numbers. Now we're about 93% funded. Anything in the high 80s or into the 90s means you are a well-funded, virtually a fully funded public pension plan. So the fact that we're 93% funded is very, very good news for all of our retirees. And the same can be said for the teachers' retirement system. I think, as you know, as state controller, I have a seat on the board of the teachers' retirement system. And then, of course, we have the 5 New York City plans. The New York City plans are also well-funded. They're not quite as well-funded as we are at the state system. But again, when you compare our funded status to pension plans across the country, New York is always in the top tier. So that should give you and your friends and neighbors who are part of the plan confidence. I know when the markets look a little shaky or they go down, retirees get very concerned. Is my pension going to be jeopardized if it's not a good stock market? And the answer is, first of all, legally, the state constitution protects your pension benefit. So thank you for making sure the Constitutional Convention was voted down and not happened a few years ago. Let's not forget that battle, right? You should applaud that because you guys were in the lead on that. But also, the reality is the money is there. And the money is there for people who are working now and hope to be retired in the near future. The challenge we have in managing the fund, and Bill Barrett and Kevin Murray can certainly relate to this, is that we have to make decisions for the man or woman who's going to start to work for New York State or for the, Albany County or the city of Troy, the person who's starting to work today or tomorrow and not going to be retiring for 25, 30 years. Those are the folks that when we're making our judgments about how we're managing the fund, where we're putting the money, those are the people we're worried about, because those are the ones we have to plan for. And I always say, keep in mind, for the people who are retired today or the people who are working today and have confidence with how our plan is funded, that's because folks that were in positions like mine years ago were making smart choices to make sure that we would keep the plan in good shape. And it's not been a Republican or Democrat issue. You look at Ned Reagan's record, or Carl McCall's record, even Ellen Hevesy's record. We go back to Arthur Levitt. Some of you remember Arthur Levitt, still the longest serving controller. I haven't beaten his record yet, but I'm number 2. Roanne wants me to be number 1, but she's not commenting on that. But that's because decisions were made back then that keep the plan in good shape today. So what is our strength as far as our investments? It's our diverse portfolio. We don't put all our eggs in one basket. I'm sure that's what you do at your personal finances as well. Just to give you a sense of our breakdown right now, we're at about 42% in public equities. So those are the stocks you'd be familiar with in terms of Wall Street. Fixed income, largely treasuries, other kinds of fixed income vehicles, now about 15%. Private equity, 13%. Real estate and real assets combined about 8%. I'm sorry, I'm losing track. I skipped private equity, didn't I? Private equity is 15%. Hey, let me go back to my numbers. I'm too busy talking and not reading. Public equity is 42%. That one I said right. Fixed income is 22%. I know Bill Barrett was saying, how come so little in fixed income? It's 22%. Generally, it's been 25%. It's a little less now. 15% in private equity, 13% in real estate, real assets, 8% in what we call opportunistic and credit, kind of distressed opportunities. So traditionally, we've been more 50% in public equity in stocks, 25% fixed income, and 25% in private markets, real estate, private equity. That's for a couple of reasons. Number one, a big chunk in fixed income because that's the safest place to put money. It's also the place where in recent years, you're not making a lot of money. When interest rates started to go up, we did a little better, but for a long time, it was not a place to make money. The concern with having 50% in public equities is that the volatility in the stock market means that if you come up to a difficult year, your fund is going to be significantly impacted by that. So 2 things happened over the past year, and they're very much related. Not to get too technical, but under New York State law, we had a limitation on how much money we could put in private markets, roughly 25%. That's why I mentioned 25% earlier in private markets. The legislature has changed that, so now we can have up to 35% in private markets. So that would be real estate, real assets, private equity. So we had an updated asset allocation, and what we decided to do, not with any extreme change, but we decided to put more of our assets allocated to private markets. We did that for 2 reasons. One reason was what I alluded to earlier. The public markets have such a level of volatility, and fixed income has not been generating a significant return. So the view was that in the private markets, real estate and private equity over the long term, we might get some stronger returns. The other reality is that because of how those assets are valued right now, we actually were higher than our previous allocation. So to a certain extent, the percentages I gave you really reflect where we're at right now. Not necessarily that we're moving money, it's just more a reflection of what the valuations are right now. But the good news about the change that the legislature made is that we have a little more flexibility, to move within our asset allocation. People always say when the stock market maybe goes down, do we move money around? The reality is because we're so big, by the time we would do any dramatic change from what our asset allocation is, the markets would probably change again. So that's why the most important investment decision we make is every 5 years we do a deep dive, we do a deep study of what our asset allocation should be. And we put it out there, and it's all public. It's on our website. If you didn't write down the numbers I just gave you twice, but we stick with it, and we have confidence in the long term that if we stick with the asset allocation that we've put out there, we're going to be able to meet our long-term goal. And what is our long-term goal? Our long-term goal, which I reported to you last year, is a 5.9% long-term rate of return. We are one of only, I think now there are only 3 public pension systems in the country that have a long-term investment goal of less than 6%. So we're more conservative than other plans, right? Now, when you're more conservative, it means you're assuming you're going to earn less money over time, which actually makes your plan more expensive. You have to anticipate, you may have to make up for not meeting your investment goal. But by having a more conservative goal, you're more likely to meet your investment goal. Why is that important? Yeah, I mentioned we're 93% funded. And actually, if you look at some of our sister plans in New York State, teachers is probably at about our level, maybe even a little higher. New York City, very similar to us, a little behind us usually. But they use a higher assumed rate of return. If you actually applied our 5.9 return to their investment calculations, we would look even more favorable. So, some of this becomes a numbers game, but I just want to emphasize the point that we are a conservative plan in terms of our long-term goal, and that's what drives our asset allocation. And when you look at the numbers, the likelihood of us meeting over time that 5.9% goal is more than a 50% probability. And that's what we're really trying to do. We're trying to stay as close to that 5.9 every year. This past year, we value the fund March 31st every year, the end of the state fiscal year. We had an 11.5% positive return, so way in excess of 5.9. Some years we don't make the number. The year before we had a slight negative. So again, it all balances out over time. And the big plus that we had was, coming out of COVID when the markets roared back, you may recall we had a 33% positive return. I took full credit for that. But I also said it's never going to happen again. And that was the year that we did 2 things. We cut the contribution rate to government employers, but we also took a chunk of those big earnings, and that's what we did to lower the assumed rate of return and do it in a year when we're still cutting the contribution rate. Because you know what the employers say when we have a good year? They say cut the rates more, right? So that's always the balancing act that we have. Our first quarter of this year, which again, we're on the state fiscal year, was June 30th. We had a positive return of 1.38, for that one quarter. I don't have the September numbers yet, but it was a good quarter, so we're going to have 2 positive quarters under our belt. You never know where the markets are headed. There's a lot of volatility out there. You all know the world is kind of falling apart around us, and there's a big distraction with the national scene right now. So it remains to be seen what the next 2 quarters will be. But I'm confident how we're structured with our asset allocation, how we're structured with a more conservative assumed rate of return, we're going to be in a strong position. Now, you're saying, all right, we had an 11.5% return, 5.9 goal, so you made plenty of money. So are you going to cut the contribution rate to the government employers this year because you're taxpayers as well, right? So you're concerned when we charge more money to school districts and local governments, particularly the state, can manage increases a little easier given the size of the state budget. Well, we did increase the employer contribution rate for the payment that'll be due in February of 2026, right? We're always projecting down the road. It was a slight increase for, the average for the employees' retirement system went from 15.2% of payroll to 16.5%. Police and fire is always much higher, from 31.2 to 33.7 of payroll. Why is this? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, the best news, I can continue to report to you that you're all going to live well into your 90s. Isn't that great? But don't look so happy about it. You should be applauding it. Good news for you. Means our pension system's got to have more money to pay for all of you living well into your 90s. It's a good problem to have. This is part of the demographic analysis that our actuary, does every year when we calculate the rates. We also continue to see a higher pace of retirements. This is one of the after effects of COVID. A lot of people kind of got burned out working during the COVID years. A lot of folks said when they saw people getting sick, some people dying, reevaluating lifestyle, personal plans. So we do have a higher number of retirements than some of the pre-COVID patterns. The third piece of it is the fact that I think, as you know, your counterparts and the active employees were very effective in getting a benefit enhancement with changes on Tier 6. You know, this has been a big issue. We now have, well, at least 60%, probably even higher now, of our workforce is in Tier 5 and 6. We've actually had a dramatic turnover in the last, decade plus. So more employees in the newer tiers. The newer tiers have a lower benefit level. There's been more pressure for there to be improvements in Tier 6. And the legislature and the governor, we don't, as you know, we don't decide the benefit level in the Comptroller's office. That's up to the legislature and the governor. And they did do some enhancements on Tier 6. So when we looked at all of this, again, with my goal of trying to keep the plan as closely funded to 100% as possible, we said we had to raise the employer contribution rate. And again, that gets back to my role as trustee and our team's role is at the end of the day to keep the plan as closely funded to 100% as possible. And we do that obviously for the benefit of our retirees, so you can be sure the money is there in addition to the constitutional guarantee. We also do it because when you look at states that have money problems, budget problems, it's often because they have huge unfunded pension liabilities. Illinois, I won't name all the other states, they have poor credit ratings because their pensions are poorly funded. And now under the accounting rules, local governments have to carry on their books their share of the unfunded pension liability that the state may have. So keeping us in the high 90s, close to 100%, that makes a stronger budget and financial picture for all of New York. And also because it gives people confidence about the strength of our pension system. We continue to see in our numbers, about 80% of our retirees continue to live in New York State. And we love our friends that are, moving down south, although I wouldn't want to be down south right now with everything we're hearing in Florida, right? We want to visit them once in a while. But the fact that 80% of our retirees stay here in New York State, that means so we paid over $15 billion in benefits last year. 80% of that money stays right here in New York, spending money, paying taxes, shopping locally. So I always try to point out that the strength of our retirement system, the confidence people have, they're continuing to live in New York, and certainly for the employees' retirement system, the average pensions are still around $25,000, $26,000, not a huge amount of money. But the difference between continuing to live in an expensive state like New York versus moving somewhere else, this is a benefit to everyone in the state. And so when you've got your friends and your neighbors who say, well, you have a pension, I don't have one, how come you have one? Well, remind them, first of all, you made the choice to be in government service, and you have a good pension because you spent enough years in the system to get a decent pension, often at lower salary than people in the private sector. And the fact that our pension system is strong, it helps everyone in the state, and you're continuing to live in New York and spending money and helping local economies. And that's why no matter how you slice it, especially if you're looking at the issue of retirement security, which I wish they were talking about more in the national debate this year than they are, the only sure way to guarantee retirement security is having a defined benefit pension. And it's unfortunate the private sector has moved away from it. Thankfully, we haven't on the public side. And certainly, I'll always stand with you to say we need to maintain that defined benefit pension. Now, that being said, and I know Diane is saying, when are you going to mention the COLA?
I would never say that.
Yes, but I could feel it. I felt the X-ray vision. So you received your COLA information for this year, and you know that New York State. So let's go back history a little bit, right? When I was first in the legislature, there was not a COLA on the books in New York State, and some of you are around long enough to remember pension supplementation, and it really was not. It just was not a good situation. Retirees would literally have to come to Albany to beg for more money in the pension. And it would go any number of years without any increase, and then you'd be lucky if you'd get some kind of an increase. So there was a big push in the late 90s to have as other states have had, a cost of living adjustment that will be built in permanently so you don't have to come begging every year to the legislature. So I guess it was around the year 2000, the markets were strong, the plan was well funded, the employer contribution rates were very, very low, near zero, not quite zero, but very, very low. And we had a great control by name of Carl McCall. The legislature said, we're going to do, well, I was in the legislature then, so we had good legislature too. We're going to do the COLA bill for our retirees. And it was, definitely the right thing to do. But the COLA that's on the books is not unlimited. In fact, it's severely limited. So it applies to the first 18,000, depending on how many years you are retired. The benefit is calculated as a single life allowance, even if you have selected a different option. So for this year, based on how the formula is set up and looking at cost of living, it came in at 1.8%, $324, $27 a month. So, the positive news is that it is some more money in your pocket. The negative, certainly for people who perhaps have been out for a long period of time at a very, very low pension, given what inflation has been in recent years, you're obviously struggling. And I know our PEA has made a big push for the last couple of years to do an enhancement on the formula. And as Diana knows, what we do in our office, we don't weigh in on specific proposals, be it Tier 6 or COLA, because that is the purview of the legislature and the governor. But we do the fiscal note, right? Because we do have to remind everybody, and I've always said, no matter which audience I've been talking to, it's perfectly reasonable to talk about benefit enhancement or COLA enhancement, particularly because our plan is well funded. But whatever we do, we have to keep in mind the cost impact on the fund. So that's what I have to do, is to remind everybody of that, because again, it gets back to what I said earlier. We want to keep the plan as closely funded to 100% as possible. I know there was some frustration among retirees when Tier 6 enhancement happened and COLA did not happen. So what's my advice to you? Well, it's the obvious. You have to come back again. Whether you're going to get a more favorable hearing, I don't know, but you're not going to get any consideration if you don't ask. And just keep in mind, our concern in terms of the pension fund side is that depending on how any COLA enhancement is structured, it will have a cost impact on the fund. And my concern will always be making sure we're keeping the plan well funded. So I'll try to do my job with my team to get investment return that consistently exceeds that 5.9%, so that there can be a discussion about an issue like the COLA without long-term hurting the fund. But do I have the magic answer for you as to how to get the legislature I don't have that answer, right? I mean, what you just have to do is do more organizing, be reasonable in the ask. I said the same thing to the unions and the active employees. Some of them said we got to get rid of Tier 6 completely. Everybody's got to be Tier 4. I said, you know what? Don't bite off more than we could chew, to use the overused phrase. Be as reasonable in the ask as possible. That's how it's more likely to happen. But as I said, we'll try to do our part to keep the plan well funded so there can be a thoughtful discussion. I do know, as I said earlier, and Diana reminds us all the time, for folks who've been retired for many years at a much lower pension level, the COLA has really not at all kept up with the impact of the costs. So that's my advice on that. I'll just mention quickly, I won't go into much detail on it, but we continue to do more with our investments to invest within New York State, because we'd like to help regional economies across New York. We do much to keep corporations accountable on a host of important issues, because we believe that good corporate citizens, companies that are well managed, are good long-term, profitable, and sustainable investments for us. All the information about our stewardship in that regard is always available on our website, so feel free to take a look at that. We have been continuing our full implementation of our retirement online. I know many of you have signed up for that to try to make it easier for you to access the system. Look, we've had some challenges, particularly with our call center. And I know some of you have tried at times to call and have had long waiting times. We're trying to address it. Part of the challenge, again, is that we've had this big increase in recent years in the number of retirements. The other challenge we've had, which is not unique to our agency, is that we've had a very hard time filling positions. Again, I think it's one of the consequences of COVID. I don't want to sound like I don't appreciate the younger generation at my age, but they all want to work 100% remote, Diana, and they don't really understand what a pension is or health benefits. So it's been hard for us to, we've had accelerated retirements. It's harder to recruit people. One of the theories of doing the Tier 6 enhancement is it might make recruitment and retention easier. But one of our real gaps has been hiring people for the call center. So as you know, the state has this temporary initiative called New York Helps, where people can get hired without having to go through all the civil service requirements as long as they meet minimum qualifications. We literally had, I think, 8,000 applications. We have been onboarding several hundred people, including a number of people for the call center and for the retirement system. So we're hoping to, first of all, get the call center to be more quickly in terms of response time. There has been an issue with backlog and recalculations, right, for people retired. If you see heads shaking. So let me say this. If you have trouble getting through, or if you particularly have a wait time, let Diana know if you can't get through. And she'll contact us and we'll expedite it. And where's Mike Blue? So I checked on your request. It was done in 2021. Your recalculation was already done. So just look at your numbers again. I got that straight. He said, when am I get my recalculation? I said, well, find out. They said, we already did it. So you're done. You're taken care of. So there you go. Satisfied customer. I didn't mean to call you out, but I did. But seriously, if you have any issue or problem, let Diana know. We'll do our best, because we know there are some situations that get very frustrating, and people then they give up trying to call, and we just don't want you to be stewing and be mad and posting nasty things about us on social media. So let Diana know. The two other things I'll mention, because many of you have grandchildren that you care about, the 529 College Savings Program we administer as well. It's a great program, separate from the pension fund, right? Doesn't mingle with those dollars. And the newer 529 program, which is the ABLE program for people with disabilities, gives them enhanced financial independence. So keep in mind those programs as well as opportunities for our office to be of help to you and your families. We have some staff here if you do have retirement questions. We have some folks from retirement that are here. And of course, the ever popular unclaimed funds. If you have lost money, you come to RPEA. There's no fee paid back to Diana if we find money for you, but we have very nice people that will search our system, and you could do that for the privacy of your home right on the computer as well. So that's kind of my wrap-up, and I just wish you all good health, first and foremost, longevity. I like to have the problem that you're all living into your 90s, so I got to make more money for the pension fund, but you can have full confidence. Our plan is well-funded. We're managing it in a smart way. We are trying to do a better job on the customer service, and we know that that's been an issue, but we're really trying to step up our game there. So just thank you for being part of our PEA. Thank you.
So, Tom, could we impose on you to take a few questions?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Now's your chance. You got one in the Charlene. I keep calling you Charlene. Charisse is going to come around with a microphone. You have one in the back there.
I don't have a question. I just have some good news for you. I was present when you joined our PEA, and you paid the lifetime membership, so you're good.
Oh, I thought I only did 5 years. I'm good, even better. Okay, even better. Thank you. Thought I only did 5 years. Okay, it's even better.
Okay, other questions? Fast and heels. Here we go.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. DiNapoli. My name is Mona Ramjas, and I'm a little nervous. I'm a registered nurse, an advanced practice registered nurse, and I'm a nurse. One of my specialties is in psychiatry. But I've worked for the state for 25 years. My last position was Director of Nursing, Suffolk County Bureau of Public Health Nursing. Not bad for a girl who was born in a village. You spoke about Medicare and Medicaid, and you wanted to know how to cut Medicaid. You were making cuts?
Well, just be more efficient. I don't want to. We have to do a better job controlling expenses. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
That's nicer than saying cut.
when I worked in Stony Brook Hospital, where I worked for 4 to 6 years, I became aware of how much money we spend in Medicaid, not Medicaid.
Medicaid. Yeah, the state is Medicaid.
And that is when I coined the term Medicaid abuse. Does that make sense?
Well, when you look at our audits, it makes sense. Yes. By abuse. So let me say. Well, I don't want to cut you off. You finish, then I'll comment. Yeah, you finish.
So then I went to work for Suffolk County.
Right.
I was a public health nurse for about 6 years, and I would go out to the elderly or the newborn. And when I became director, that's when I had to sit in the boardroom and listen to how much money we're losing here and how much money Medicare pays and Medicaid. And I hate numbers, but I had to learn that.
Sure.
And I would like to get back. I've been retired for 12 years, and I've been traveling around this beautiful country of ours as well as abroad. And I would like to get back into areas of public service and talk about this Medicaid abuse. And, well, that's my term.
Yeah.
And how can we bring more money to our elderly in terms of Medicare contributions? Because you get these letters and you're denied this service and that service, and you have to persist.
Yeah.
Like I have someone who's talking about her shoes, and because she had the surgery, she's like an inch shorter, and she has to pay for those shoes herself.
Mm-hmm.
And we have worked in the state and took a less pay. I could have been making lots of dollars in New York City, but I didn't. I chose to work in the public forum,
Mm-hmm.
and it was less pay, but I looked at the long-term benefits of getting a retirement check, and I was lucky to get my foot in the door at the right time, and I benefit from the governor. My first governor was Mario Cuomo, and he did an initiative to help send back women to school, and that's how I was able to get all these degrees behind my name, through my public service, my dedication, and utilizing the system. So I could speak to those, like you said, retaining people and how to do that, and talk about Medicaid abuse.
Well, I'll vote for you. And I want to say thank you for your choice to do public service, which is admirable, and I commend you on it. And I hope you're enjoying the fact that you made the right choice and are getting that retirement check. So, when we talk about so Medicare obviously is set by the federal government. So I would have less to offer, in terms of Medicare. In terms of Medicaid, what we have often found with our audits, and we do regular audits on Medicaid, sometimes people perceive that the reason the program is so expensive is that there's rampant fraud. What we have found is that there is some fraud, usually by the provider, not by the patient. However, the bigger opportunity to realize efficiencies or save money is in the way the system is administered. And I think that's where I would put it in the category of abuse, in that there's improper billing, there's double payments, there are people getting coverage for services that they're not entitled to because the plan doesn't look at it appropriately. They're not put. There's this big back and forth between fee-for-service versus Medicaid managed care. There have been a lot of complications with that. The system sometimes double pays people, providers, right? I'm not talking about the patients. So So we make recommendations regularly, and I would encourage you to look at our website because we put all these audits out there. And if you have any further comments on other areas that we could look at in terms of those audits, we'd be very interested in that. When we do an audit, again, it's similar to any audit that we do. We can't compel the Department of Health to implement the changes we recommend, but we have had many situations where when we identify money that was misspent, they can collect it back, and we then will do a follow-up audit to see whether or not they have. But we also have in New York State, I think as you know, I'm sure you know, a Medicaid Inspector General's office. So when there are cases of fraud, and there have been a couple just this year alone on medical transportation for people getting Medicaid, where there have been companies set up that rip off the system. You've also had the Attorney General and local DAs involved. So there's been a lot of effort, but still it's an expensive program, and too often, I think to your point, the quality of the service often is lacking, and we're spending too much money in places where the money shouldn't be spent. So, but I would encourage you to look at the audits. If you have some other suggestions on other audits we could look at, we'd certainly be all ears and be happy to hear it based on your experience.
Other questions? There you go, Charlene. Wait, she'll bring the microphone to you.
Hi, Charlene Lejewski from Central New York. When we are looking at the COLA and wanting to go back to write bills, is it better to go after a larger percentage or to raise the cap of the 18,000?
Well,
It's an
interesting question. I mean, and I don't want to be in a position of giving
advice,
lobbying advice.
Yeah.
But Roanne DeCito would be very good at telling you what she thinks would be more like. Look, here's
just in this room.
just in this room. Yeah. So here's what I would say. Whatever strategy, and you raise an interesting point. Have Diane and the team be in touch with our folks, because I think the big issue is the cost.
Yeah.
Right? So, and again, far be it from me to try to, tell you what to do, because I say to the union folks, you're there to fight for what's good for your members. I understand that. But the more reasonable the cost impact, the more likely it is that it could be achieved. So I would say whether it's one of those two options or maybe there's a third strategy, we will give you guidance in terms of what we would project the cost impact to be. And we can help, besides the formal fiscal note, we can help with, given informal, financial impact data. And then it's up to you to make a judgment. But look, I think the challenge you have, again, with all due respect to our friends who are active employees, the unions have a lot of clout. So the extent to which you can get some of the unions to be supportive of retirees, as opposed to it being either or, which is what I think kind of happened this year, I think that might be right, Roanne. I mean,
yes.
And I'm not saying that's an easy task, but so I would say as you approach it again, have them as reasonable as possible. It still achieves what you're looking for in terms of cost impact, and see if you can engage. And I know some of the unions operate differently in terms of how the retirees are affiliated with the active unions, but the extent to which you could get some buy-in from some of the bigger active unions, I think that would make a difference.
So the original bill, way back like 3 versions ago, did in fact have raise the threshold higher. We've now brought it down from 18 to 21,000 as your minimum threshold. Yeah. And then we also put a couple of components in it for additional pension income that once we got from your fiscal people a readback of what it was going to cost, we scaled that back. And I also had another conversation. I can't remember his name, the young man who's in your office who deals with this.
Aaron Young?
Yes, it was Aaron
Young.
who's very good, and I had an informal conversation with him, and he said, look, if you do this, if you do this, if you do that, it's going to reduce the cost. It'll make it a more reasonable bill. So that's what we're going to be working on in terms of the coming legislative session. And as you heard Kevin say before, Neil Breslin, Senator Breslin, who was a big champion, is going to be retiring. So we're going to have to essentially make some new friends in the legislature so we can, talk to them about the bill. But we have been making changes all along because of that. So we're going to take another look at it. We'll talk some more with your folks and, get a reasonable bill that we can do.
And then step up your contact. I mean, look, it's so important to have a relationship with legislators. Obviously, I'm sure you do some lobbying, when they're all in town. But what's also important is the relationship you build with legislators back home, right? So RPEA, you have chapters all across the state. So my other recommendation is, step up your local chapter outreach to senators and assembly members in the home district. Make sure they know, besides the voice that Diana and the team give to in the state capitol, that they know that RPEA members are strong in their respective districts and constituencies, and that's how you develop that the consistency and the constancy of the relationship and the message. Look, no one's going to tell you flat out no. The question is, how do you get them to an affirmative action? That's the gap.
Right.
No one's going to say no to retirees that are suffering with high cost of living. I mean, everybody gets that. The question is, how do you get them to the point that there's a proposal that they feel they could go to leadership on and say, hey, it's time we do something on this. And that's where, again, it gets back to cost impact being as reasonable as possible. It makes it more likely. And that's what the unions, when they were fighting for Tier 6, by the way, they're going to be coming back for more Tier 6 changes too. Keep that in mind. But part of what happened is the unions, instead of coming at it from 5 different ways, they drilled down, they came up with a united position, and they made it a more limited ask. And that's what made it palatable for it to be adopted. So that I would just recommend whatever that looks like in terms of COLA, that is the kind of strategy, you need to follow as well.
And I always say, no matter what the age of the legislator you're talking to, remind them that someday they will also get a state pension, and they will want to have the maximum amount that they can get as well, so they can do it now.
God forbid they should do something in self-interest.
Other questions? Anything else?
Clearly, Diana's an experienced lobbyist.
Oh, we got one back there.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
My name is Jennifer LeBlanc. I are actually Cornells now, recently married. So I retired from tax and finance in April after 33 years. And I had an appointment in March at State Street to go over my choices and see about my final average salary. And at that point, I was told, which I had heard rumors about the recalculation process being significantly delayed. I was told not to expect my final average salary recalculated for 5.5 to 6 years. And I thought that was very significant. And I mean, it's quite a bit of money for me. I did a calculation myself, being an accountant. And I'm concerned, and I would like to know what changes you're making. You mentioned it. You're obviously aware it's a problem. And that I was told at the time, too, I think they were working on 2019 recalculations.
I think they're done now. Yeah, no, it's a problem. I would say two things. First of all, if you give your name and contact number to one of those gentlemen against the wall, we'll follow up. Number one. Number two, what most folks don't realize, because we did an analysis, in the overwhelming majority of cases, the pension benefit you get is at about 95% of what you're going to get anyway. It is a rare circumstance that it's going to be recalculated at a significantly different amount. I'm not saying that there aren't some circumstances where that is the case, and it's often the challenge. So one of the issues we have is we we only can do the calculations based on the information we have. And one of the challenges is that, less so probably with a state agency like the one you work for, but we often have a difficult time getting the information from the employers. And so if we don't have the information, we can't close the case. And that's been one of the contributors to the fact that there's been such a delay. Well, again, probably not relating to your situation, but you also have, particularly with police and fire, you have folks in special plans. You have folks, I don't know whether you were overtime eligible, but overtime, again, not being reported to us fully and on time. And so when even if it doesn't affect you directly in terms of your own personal situation, when the entire system gets backlogged because of all these other, that's how you get caught, in that queue. But if it's a pretty straight retirement, you're getting virtually what you're going to get anyway. Probably not going to be much of a change, but we are adding more staff. We've made it a priority, but there's no getting around it. It is not a level of customer service that we are satisfied with by any means. But we'll do a follow up for you since you raised it, and we'll check it out.
Anyone else? Last chance. Okay, you're off the hook.
Thank you all. Stay well. Happy fall.